When a brilliant student refuses to be acknowledged due to her skin color? What happens to an esteemed math professor? 3 famous professors attempt to disparage a bright black student from Chicago's South Side, but they are unaware that she is secretly altering calculus theory in front of them. Will Kamari Johnson concede failure or force the academic community to face its preconceptions and recognize a genius that doesn't fit its mold? Prepare yourself for a shocking conclusion to this gripping tale of ingenuity, discrimination, and retaliation. Tell us where you are watching from before we head back. Make sure to subscribe if this tale resonates with you, because I have something very unique planned for you tomorrow. Kamari Johnson was both anxious and in awe as she gazed up at the massive MIT structure. She was holding the admission letter carefully. And after all of the hardship, it felt unreal to finally be there. She was aware that the trip would be challenging. She didn't know how she would fit in with pupils who seemed to be from a world that was so different from her own, because she was from a poor area in Chicago. She was aware, however, that she possessed a special quality that no one could take away from her. There was a persistent sense of displacement on campus. Kamari felt as though she was entering a realm that wasn't hers as students walked past her, wearing pricey clothing and grinning confidently. Am I adequate? She pondered as the strain increased. She recalled her grandmother's advice. They will notice your color when they look at you. However, they will see your mind once they get to know you. Kamari was aware that her skill would outspeak any stigma. Dr. Everett Cole was waiting for Kamari at the math department office with a fake smile. He glanced up and down at her. I take it that you are the student enrolled in the diversity program? He questioned with skepticism, trying not to panic. Kamari nodded. His remarks carried the weight of his mistrust. Every moment there appeared to challenge her skills. And she was aware that in order to be taken seriously, she would need to demonstrate far more than just her academic prowess. Kamari sensed that Dr. Cole was staring at her as he discussed the specifics of the course. As though he were assessing her presence, he brought up her grades, but in a detached way. As though he already knew, Kamari resisted the want to defend herself and held her breath. It was obvious. Her accomplishments seemed to be lessened only because she was a black woman attending a public institution. MIT was a demanding and intimidating place, with the entrance hall dominated by images of famous mathematicians. Kamari could feel the history of mathematics flowing through the walls. However, something didn't seem right as she observed those solemn expressions. She was aware that she was an anomaly to many people there. A young black lady in a field that hardly ever saw somebody like her. Being able to establish oneself in a world that didn't seem to have room for her was just as important as having strong math skills. Kamari's differences from her classmates grew increasingly noticeable as she spent more time on campus. Kamari considered the 2 jobs she had to support her grandma, while everyone else talked about summer internships at famous firms and international travel. Despite not having the same privileges, her mentality was prepared to face any obstacle. She knew in her heart that she was not defined by her past. No one could take away her connection to everyone there because of math. Kamari was not overlooked. She sensed her peers' suspicious looks in class. Rumors circulated that she was part of the diversity initiative, as though her inclusion was more of a favor than a success. However, Kamari was unmoved by their attempts to minimize her accomplishments. Nothing could prevent her from demonstrating her value. She was there to grow and learn. She was further inspired to demonstrate her abilities by each odd glance. In spite of everything, Kamari started to see something that strengthened her resolve. She wasn't the only one, but she was the exception. There were other minority group children there, dealing with the same challenges and being asked about their skills all the time. She was aware that everyone who, like her, had to overcome imperceptible obstacles was represented by her fight, which was not only personal. Kamari was more aware than ever that her path involved more than simply being a math prodigy. Redefining what it means to be a genius in the academic sphere and dispelling stigmas were the goals. For Kamari, the first few days of class were really demanding. She understood that she was not overlooked because she was the only black lady in the class. While some glances were merely inquisitive, others were obviously contemptuous, as though her presence was more of a favor than an acknowledgement of her skill. To get past the discrimination masquerading as innocent curiosity, Kamari felt she needed to prove herself even more. But that only strengthened her resolve to demonstrate her worth. She may have been accepted to MIT due to a diversity initiative more than her academic achievement. And Kamari was aware that the other students saw her as an oddity. She was never stupid enough to disregard the rumors. Many were unaware, however, that beneath her quiet exterior lay a sharp mind that had been taught arithmetic by herself in Chicago's public libraries. Kamari was prepared to astonish the academic community, who had a lot to learn about her. The weight of being referred to as a diversity project was evident in the classroom. One of Kamari's best friends, Zora, was clearly uncomfortable with the circumstances. He was aware that Kamari wasn't deserving of being undervalued. Yet there was no denying the pressure she was under. At every opportunity, she felt compelled to defend her being there. Zora was aware, though, that despite the world's efforts to categorize her, her talent could not be disregarded indefinitely. Kamari eventually became weary of being the exception and started to adopt a different mindset. She refused to let other people's constrained perceptions of her define her. Every encounter and every obstacle served as motivation for her to demonstrate her abilities. She seemed to be resisting the condescending gaze that attempted to devalue her every day. She was neither a favor nor an exception. Without a question, Kamari Johnson had a sharp mind, and she worked hard to earn her spot. Kamari found theoretical calculus to be considerably more difficult than she had anticipated. It seemed impossible for any first-year student to complete the diagnostic test that Dr. Cole had set. She had never even come across the complexity of the questions in the math forums she frequently visited. Kamari, though, was not deterred. She felt capable even in the face of difficulty because she understood that arithmetic was a universal language. It was the ideal opportunity to demonstrate her true knowledge. Kamari proceeded confidently, while the other pupils found the initial challenges difficult. She started using her self-taught experience to meticulously answer each question. Her heart was racing when she completed the first section of the test ahead of schedule. But she didn't let that distract her. She was aware that she needed to impress. She couldn't merely finish. After finishing, she highlighted her creative methods in a few notes she wrote about her solutions. Dr. Cole was on the verge of realizing that Kamari might have been misjudged. Dr. Cole's shocked expression was not missed when Kamari turned in her test. His faces changed as he swiftly skimmed through her responses, taking in their depth and clarity. Kamari was aware that in addition to providing the right response, she had tackled the questions in a manner that few others could. For the first time, she felt really in charge. She knew in her heart that she was only starting to reveal her true self, even though the other students had fallen behind. Kamari noticed that something was different at the conclusion of class. Their skepticism turned to grudging respect as they started to whisper about her. Kamari was aware that this was only the start. She thought she was starting to make progress, even though no one fully recognized her yet. Although Dr. Cole didn't appear to be persuaded, she was encouraged to keep dismantling obstacles by the glimmer of uncertainty in his eyes. Dr. Cole's perspective on Kamari has changed. He wasn't convinced, but there was something about her manner that made it difficult to ignore her. He was obviously skeptical, though he thought it was just luck that she had performed well on the first evaluation. Kamari remained concentrated, thinking that this was only the beginning. She was aware that gaining the respect of a professor who had already made a judgment about her would require more than one strong exam. Even though Kamari was clearly gifted, she was unable to ignore her surroundings. It was implicitly assumed that she wouldn't be able to meet MIT's higher standards for greatness. In a sense, her classmates were waiting for her to fail. Their looks and hushed comments gave Kamari a sense of this. She felt like a lab experiment, a sort of exception who, despite her brilliance, couldn't compete with the rest. However, that simply motivated her to keep going. Kamari experienced a mix of anxiety and excitement when it came time to take part in her first live demonstration in front of her professors and classmates. She was prepared for the task, which was a practical test in front of the top experts. She had spent weeks delving into theoretical issues, learning something new every day. Kamari knew she was going to demonstrate that her talent was not a coincidence, but rather the result of an extraordinary mind. As she got up and started writing her solution on the board, there was silence in the room while Kamari went on to explain. She initially observed that a lot of people were waiting for her to make a mistake. However, their expressions changed as she continued. Although she was aware of Dr. Cole's and his colleagues' skepticism, her calculations and justifications were convincing, unquestionable, and unambiguous. There was a heavy quiet when she was done. Kamari was aware that what she had just done was unimaginable to many people there. As a young black woman, she was challenging academic norms and gradually dispelling the stigma that surrounded her. Kamari sensed that the classroom was becoming more tense. Some of her students' appearances started to shift after her demonstration went well. However, the expression was more akin to a mix of dread and envy than one of respect. She could hear their whispers, which attempted to minimize her skills and raised doubts about how a student from her community could possess such information. Every disparaging remark wounded her, but it also strengthened her resolve to establish her legitimacy there. However, it was clear that Dr. Cole was uneasy. He did not like being challenged by a young kid with such a unique background. As evidenced by his stiff stance, he made an effort to conceal it. But it was clear that Kamari's presence jeopardized his faith in both the system and his class. She could go above and beyond what was anticipated of a first-year student, making her more than just a diversity project. Despite her outstanding achievement, Kamari was aware that she would never meet the same standards as the other kids. She could tell by every look that they were waiting for her to fail. The hardest task, though, was figuring out how the teachers perceived her. There was no admiration. Instead, there was a pervasive distrust and a sense that she was there to prove something that didn't fit the conventional model. She pondered what they actually expected of her in light of this. Kamari's teachers started paying closer attention to her answers as she kept improving. Specifically, Dr. Cole was fixated on identifying some error or weakness in her logic. He examined each of her assignments more thoroughly than he did the others. Kamari was aware that he secretly hoped for a weakness to excuse her existence there rather than for her responses to be viewed as intelligent. However, she refused to provide him with that level of fulfillment. Dr. Cole's unduly harsh evaluation of Kamari's work altered the atmosphere in the classroom. He didn't waste any time in wondering where her answers came from after one of her hardest tests. He whispered to himself, loud enough for Kamari to hear, "These answers are too complex for a first-year student." Soon after, she was summoned to an informal meeting when they started implying that she might have cheated. Kamari was confronted with an accusation that confused her. Dr. Cole appeared intent on finding something that was suspicious enough. Even though they had no concrete proof of copying, Kamari attempted to clarify. But her words seemed to get lost in the ether. It didn't seem to matter how hard she studied on her own, how much she loved math, or how many hours she spent studying. They just cared because she wasn't like the others. The verdict was unquestionable. Yet the proof was there. For Kamari, the most agonizing realization was that, despite her abilities, the system seemed more concerned with disparaging her than with acknowledging her. She had worked hard to win her spot. But when her teachers questioned where her solutions came from, everything began to come apart. She felt isolated and unsupported, as though her academic career had been ruined by a lack of confidence in her abilities rather than a lack of skill. She still had a voice, but only in the subject of mathematics. As Kamari tried to come to terms with the charge, She came to the realization that she was fighting for respect as much as to demonstrate her mathematical prowess, in addition to endangering her job. The plagiarism accusation was a manifestation of the discrimination she encountered simply for being herself. Kamari was aware that she could not allow herself to be shook. She was standing up for her identity, her worth, and her right to be there. Not simply for her mathematical solutions. This was only the beginning of the fight, although Kamari was aware that her path would not be simple. She was adamant about persevering. She was shaken but not broken by the plagiarism accusation. She recalled the many hours she spent studying alone at the public library, when her books were crammed with formulas and scribbled notes. This was about demonstrating that the system was flawed, not just about having strong mathematical skills. She arose more resilient than before, prepared to take on any challenge. Tell us where you're watching from before we go. Make sure to subscribe if this tale resonates with you, because I have something very unique planned for you tomorrow. Kamari's friend and classmate Jalen Cruz saw how much she was going through. He was aware that she wasn't deserving of the strain. Without hesitation, he offered his support, saying, "You're not alone." From the start, Jalen had been among the few who had faith in her. He was willing to assist Kamari because he was aware of what she was capable of. They started working together to gather information and records that would disprove the charges. Kamari talked candidly about her experience with Jalen. She described how arithmetic became her only means of escape throughout her early years in a neglected Chicago neighborhood. She described the restless evenings she spent studying by herself, working out solutions to difficulties that others would discover years later. This love of arithmetic was sparked by a need to survive rather than luxury. Kamari was an underappreciated prodigy, not a diversity project. At MIT, every obstacle she overcame strengthened her. Kamari refused to be immobilized by the critical glances. She turned them into gasoline instead. She was aware that others would gradually come to understand that her presence there was not an accident. Kamari was about to convert skepticism into admiration. She wanted to do more than prove herself capable. She wanted to show herself that she was as capable as everybody else, and that she had a right to be there. Kamari knew it would be another attempt to discredit her when she was summoned to a meeting with Dr. Cole and her colleagues. There was tension in the air. Dr. Cole started discussing the exceptionality of Kamari's answers, but it was obvious that he was looking for weakness. Kamari maintained her composure. She was aware that she knew the answers, but she also realized that the test went much beyond basic math. It was not Kamari's answers that made the teachers uneasy, but rather the notion that she could have come to them on her own, with unsustainable stress. Dr. Cole stated that it was unlikely that a kid with her profile would accomplish such outcomes. Kamari understood that her credibility as a real math student was being questioned, not her mathematical prowess. The notion that she didn't fit the conventional mold was too much for them to bear. During the meeting, Zora, who was standing next to Kamari, did not keep quiet. She was aware that Kamari's presence was due to her genius rather than chance. Zora argued with the teachers. Kamari has the right to be here, just like any of us. She recognized that the system needed to be challenged after witnessing the unfairness firsthand. Kamari needed Zora's help, and the incident became a battle against the marginalization of minorities in academics, as well as for her acceptance at MIT. After then, Kamari spoke. "I resolved these issues on my own," she asserted, "even though I faced challenges at every turn. My purpose is not to represent diversity." Her voice sounded determined. "I'm here for my mind and what I know." She was aware that now was the time to demonstrate that she was deserving of being there. For Kamari, that meeting was a confirmation of who she was and her right to be there. In addition to being an academic assessment, Kamari was anxious yet determined when she received the summons to the Academic Integrity Committee. She was aware of the harsh questioning of her stance. The teachers were staring at her when she walked in, and the mood was solemn. Despite the formality of the discussion, Kamari felt that she was being evaluated on the basis of who she was as much as her solutions. She was there to demonstrate, once and for all, that she was on the right track. The questioning started with Dr. Cole, who appeared to be the most doubtful for a first-year student. "Your solutions are incredibly sophisticated," he remarked impersonally. Kamari didn't panic. She was aware that this altercation was meant to make her weaker. He wanted her to acknowledge that she was unable to come up with such answers by herself. "Dr. Cole, I didn't copy from anyone," Kamari responded, glaring at him. The gloomy air in the room was broken by her remarks. "All of these solutions are mine, and they are based on months of independent study." Marcus, who'd been observing intently, didn't think twice. He got up and started to provide statistics about the disparity in minority pupils' assessments, particularly with regard to Kamari. He said, "I've compiled statistics on the grading patterns, and those patterns are not only inconsistent, but unfair." Kamari relied heavily on his support, and she was relieved to discover that despite the hostile climate, there were still people who were prepared to battle with her. Finally, Dean Hargrove, who had been passively observing, spoke. "We must deliberate," he stated in a somber and serious tone. The blow was severe, but Kamari Johnson refused to back down. "Kamari Johnson, your participation in this course is suspended until the investigation is complete." She was aware that this battle was only getting started and that she would not be silenced under any circumstances. Kamari became aware that she wasn't alone as the tension increased. The astronomy department's Eliza Washington approached her and smiled encouragingly. Eliza remarked, "I understand what you're going through." Eliza had faced similar issues throughout her career and was now prepared to take on Kamari. "I've seen it before. They try to bring you down because you're an exception." She was aware that overcoming the obstacles minorities faced at MIT required group opposition. Eliza sent Kamari a flash disk with comprehensive information on discrimination cases she had gathered over the years. "Students like you are the victims of a system that never intended for them to arrive here," Eliza clarified. Kamari found the amount of knowledge impressive. She would eventually have to reveal a pattern of unfair treatment in the more than 20 examples that were documented. This information would be vital in the upcoming conflict. The college rapidly became aware of Kamari's predicament. Other pupils started to come up to her with words of encouragement and support. Some were there merely to listen, while others sat with her and talked about mathematical concepts. One of the youngsters remarked, "You have our solidarity." Kamari was moved because she never thought that in such a cutthroat setting, such support would surface. It was now evident that her battle was turning into a metaphor for all those who experienced the same form of exclusion. Kamari had never before experienced the level of support she received. Her belief that her struggle was not only personal but also collective was strengthened by every discussion and act of support. Kamari was aware that others would follow if she was able to remove these obstacles. Her quest was no longer merely to demonstrate her mastery of mathematics. It was also to alter the idea of what it meant to be an MIT elite student. She was prepared to lead the movement that was about to emerge as resistance grew, as Kamari got ready to expose who she really was. The tension in the classroom increased. She was aware that she had unintentionally become an anonymous legend and that the term Quantum Z was making the rounds on math forums. The truth had to be spoken now, with a calm voice that reverberated around the room. Kamari declared, "I am Quantum Z." Her classmates were shocked, horrified, and fell silent. There was no denying it now. In actuality, the young lady who had endured so much suspicion and denial was among the brightest mathematicians of her day. Dr. Wong, who was in the room, came up to Kamari as she disclosed who she was, his eyes wide with surprise. For months, he had been following Quantum Z's work without knowing who was responsible for the findings. However, how did you accomplish that? Still incredulous, he asked. It was time to explain. Kamari knew. I began when advanced math classes were discontinued at my school. After work, I studied alone at night. I am Quantum Z because I had to be. Dr. Wong nodded, his tone now more appreciative than doubtful. Silent or replaced the initial shock. The impact of Kamari's announcement was instantaneous. Her co-workers, some of whom were still in shock, started to whisper. Others compared the news to a lightning strike that illuminated all they had previously been unable to see. Many of the most cutting-edge mathematical discoveries in academic forums were now the brainchild of Kamari, the South Chicago kid they had undervalued. She had been evaluated based on her background and race, but she demonstrated at that time that talent knows no bounds. Kamari started out by describing the origins of her work as Quantum Z. She had tested her theories and worked through difficult equations in secret throughout the years. Away from academic oversight, she looked at the lecturers and remarked, "I didn't have the resources you had." Kamari noted that her solutions were based on her intuitive, self-taught understanding, a method that no one appeared to comprehend until that point. But I didn't need them. My passion for math led me to discover what many thought was impossible. She now had evidence that her work had paid off. Kamari became aware that the dynamic in the classroom had radically changed once she was revealed as Quantum Z. She was now viewed with a mix of distrust and reverence by the students, while some still viewed her as a threat. Others started to approach her and ask for assistance, but Kamari was aware that her presence was still being implicitly judged. She was there to question the expectations of those around her. Not just to be a famous mathematician, there was also division among the professors in the department. Kamari was starting to be viewed by some as a remarkable example of unquestionable skill. The notion that someone without conventional credentials might have accomplished so much, however, worried some more. The opposition weighed heavily on Kamari. She was aware, however, that the professors secretly dreaded the thought that she, a black woman from an underprivileged community, had accomplished so much without having the opportunity to do so. Kamari realized that her reputation was not the only thing at risk as the effects of her revelation spread. She stood for something greater, the dismantling of an educational system that often left talented people from underprivileged neighborhoods out. However, Kamari's disclosure made it impossible for MIT to ignore her. Outside of campus, her work as Quantum Z and her creative methodology started to get recognition. Unexpectedly, she was asked to give a presentation at the International Mathematics Conference. Kamari believed that this was the perfect opportunity to demonstrate her full strength to the academic community. It was an opportunity to transcend her academic persona and be acknowledged for her sharp intellect rather than her history. While receiving the invitation was a significant accomplishment, Kamari was aware that it would provide even more difficulties. She would have to struggle to keep breaking down barriers in the academic world, which was full with expectations. For her, this new endeavor was more than simply a conference. It was a chance to revolutionize mathematics and push the boundaries of what was thought to be feasible. Kamari understood that her attendance at the meeting was about all minorities who experienced the same discrimination and restrictions. Not just herself. Kamari was aware that her path would have been considerably more challenging had Jalen and Eliza not been there to encourage her. Jalen always reminded her of her potential and supported her when she was unsure. In response, Eliza gave Kamari the information she needed to back up her claims and let her know she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Kamari felt stronger as she reflected on the support she received and realized how important they were to her accomplishment. She could not have progressed this far without their vital support system. Kamari thought back on her path thus far. Despite all of its challenges, MIT had evolved into a space where she felt empowered. Her fight was about more than just getting noticed. She wanted to alter the system and demonstrate that someone with her kind of talent and history belonged in these places. Kamari was aware that her achievements at MIT were only the start for herself and others who would follow her. She was more prepared than ever to face the future and dismantle the obstacles that still stood. If this story resonated with you, tell someone who needs motivation to stand up for what's right. Remember that empathy and respect have the capacity to change lives. And sign up for more transformational stories. Remember to never undervalue anybody based solely on their outward appearance.